Okay,
Okay,
to begin.
thank you, sir. Well, good morning to our lecturer, Mr. Wayne Bisu, and to our esteemed colleagues. Welcome to Group 9's presentation on power and influence. Now, presenting today would be the members of our group, Mr. Joel Hansen, Mr. Devanand Samuj, Mr. Dwayne Warner, and myself, Ryan Ramcharan. So when we hear the word power, what exactly comes to mind? Do we think about this guy here? How about these people here? How about these people? Or maybe even them? Or how about maybe some of these historical leaders? Just so you know, whatever you may have picked, you are not wrong. Power in organizations, in society, or in general takes many forms and are sourced through various means. So what exactly determines power itself? Is it physical strength? Or maybe how well you can influence others to follow you? Or how about the ability to lead others? Or maybe even the command of resources. Take, for example, a military force. Is it because of how much influence someone may have on decisions? Maybe even the charisma and the charm of someone? Or how about the position that they hold? Or the knowledge and expertise that they have within an organization? It could be one of these, it could be a couple of them, or who knows, maybe all of them. So as we go through today, we'll be better able to make that determination. So today we will look at what exactly is the source of power and of influence and the effects of their application and how well it's incorporated into leadership roles. We will look at transformational and transactional leadership, the characteristics of charismatic leaders, positional power versus personal power, the types of power and the responses to them. We will look at the sources of leader power and the power that is gained through political activity. We'll even look at a certain leader influence, and we'll end with the ethical considerations when using power. So who exactly can be considered as powerful people? When we think of powerful people, as we see from in the earlier slides, we can agree that they might be widely diverse and they could come in all forms from various fields with different personalities and styles, and obviously from varying sources of their power and of their influence. So if we look at this diverse compilation of people here, and in considering who may possess power, who may have influence, we might consider people like politicians, such as presidents and world leaders that we see here. We see it could be business leaders, such as Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and many others. Or even religious leaders, such as the Pope or the Dalai Lama, or sports icons, such as Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Michael Jordan, and so much others. Or even entertainment personalities, such as actors, singers, writers, you name it. Or it could be none of the above. Power itself could originate from a different avenue. Power could come instead from a deep passion about an idea or a vision, and not only believing that idea could become a reality, but to be able to influence others to believe it as well. So first, let's look at two types of leaders that might have that type of influence, and the characteristics that they may possess that would make them so influential and pivotal within organizations and basically in general today. And these are transformational leaders and charismatic leaders. So it is important to note that the key aspects of both of these originate not necessarily from a position of given authority, but more so from the strength of the leader's personal power. And we'll talk more about the differences between position and personal power later on. So let's dissect what it means to be a transformational leader. Now, this is often compared to transactional leadership, and understanding the differences between the two might be the best possible way to appreciating the characteristics itself of a transformational leader. So let's look at a transactional leader and what it entails. So as the name implies, Transactional leadership involves the execution of a transaction. Therefore, an exchange process takes place between leaders and followers. So in essence, needs and desires are identified, both individually specific needs and general needs. And followers are rewarded these in exchange for meeting specified objectives or for performing certain duties. Note that these types of leaders focus on the present and they excel at keeping the organization running smoothly and efficiently. They concentrate more on maintaining the stability within the organization rather than promoting any kind of change within it. So we look at how it compares to a transformational leader. So quite contrastingly, transformational leadership focuses more on intangible elements. And these might include things like vision, like shared values, like ideas, rather than just a reward process. So in essence, it's based more on the personal values, the beliefs, and the qualities of the leader itself, rather than on an exchange process between the leader and the follower. Now, these types of leaders focus more on bringing about significant change in both followers and the organization in general. So if you look at this diagram here, we see they have various categories that leaders can fall into. And we can see the differences on the left-hand side of a transactional leader and on the right-hand side of a transformational leader. So if we just look at a couple of them, we look at the very top leaders, the leader's source of power. If you look at a transactional leader, where does their source of power come from? We can see if it comes from their rank or their position within the organization, because they have that power to bestow certain rewards and to command certain things. Whereas a transformational leader, their power comes from their character and their competence within the organization. If you go down to follower reaction, now, according to the type of leader, according to the type of power that they have, we see the transactional leader, we see they have rank and position. Now, the type of reaction from the follower obviously would be compliance. They would comply because of the rank or the position of the leader. Whereas on a transformational leader side, you will get commitment because they are committed to the person itself, to the character of this leader. And if you come down to rewards, say the transactional leader, their reward type would be things that they can actually give. So they have pay, promotion, awards, and all these kinds of things. Whereas a transformational leader reward system is based on pride, on self-esteem, on the sense of achieving organizational goals. So we see the differences between these two leaders, and all the different categories, they have their differences between the the transactional and the transformational leader. We look at some of the personality traits now. So although transformational leadership skills could be learned, and I'll say that again and I'll say it slowly, transformational leadership skills could be learned. However, obviously there's a but, there are some personality traits that makes it easier for a leader to adopt this type of leadership behavior. And these might include the emotional stability, the agreeableness, the positive engagement with the world, and the high emotional intelligence. So if we notice, all these traits that we see listed here refer to the ability of the individual to establish positive relationships, which essentially is the foundation of a transformational-based influence. So therefore, by possessing these traits, it makes it easier for a leader to adopt a transformational leadership style. Now, outside of the differences in the characteristics of these two types of leaders that we see that went in the slides before, the effects, however, of transformational leadership differs from transactional leadership in four main areas. And we look at the four main areas briefly. Firstly, they tend to develop followers into leaders. So they foster a type of buy-in towards a common mission and vision. We're talking about transformational leaders here. So followers have relative freedom and they have liberty to accomplish organizational goals. And they change perspective towards productive change. So they change the perspective of their followers to achieve productive and organizational change. Secondly, we'll see that they elevate the concerns of followers from lower level physical needs, such as safety and security, to a higher level psychological needs, such as self-esteem and self-actualization. Now, if we remember, I think all of us might remember this is synonymous with something. This is synonymous to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So therefore, they focus on the individual's requirement for growth and development, and they help them to progress higher up Maslow's model. Thirdly, they inspire followers to go beyond their own self-interest for the good of the group. So because they are admired and trusted, and very often they are emulated, it becomes easier for them to foster a belief in the requirement for change. And followers are therefore willing to make personal sacrifice to achieve the goals set out. And fourth, they paint a vision of a desired end state. So they communicate this end state, this future end state, in a way that makes the entire effort seem like it worthwhile, like it means something. So with this shared and desirable vision, followers are now willing to work towards this transformation. Now, while transactional leaders might focus on goals and promote stability within the organization, and transformational leaders focus on vision and creating significant change in both the followers and the organization as a whole, the most effective leaders tend to exhibit a bit of both transactional and transformational leadership patterns, and knowing when to apply what, and knowing how best to reach their followers and to achieve the goals that they set out to achieve. Now, this brings us to charismatic leadership. So when we hear the term charisma, what comes to mind? What exactly is charisma? Well, according to the popular online resource Psychology Today, it can be simply defined as an individual's ability to attract and influence other people. Right? DAFT kind of highlights something almost similar to that, saying that charismatic leaders have the ability to inspire and motivate people to do more than they would normally do, despite obstacles and personal sacrifice. Right? So charismatic leaders have this ability to motivate and influence people towards a goal, towards something. Right? And we look at some of their traits. So also know that although many transformational leaders display charismatic traits and seek to increase the engagement of followers, charismatic leaders itself basically instills a sense of awe and a level of submission in their followers. So transformational leaders might display charismatic traits, but it doesn't make them a charismatic leader per se. So they might have some level of charisma, but charismatic leaders go a little bit further than that, a little bit beyond that. Right? So some might describe it to be more than just getting buy-in, right? But more of a type of, some would say, a type of brainwashing, if you may, through flattery, through guile, and through charm. Right? So it is no surprise that these types of leaders often emerge in troubled times, both in the organizations or in society in general. Right? Because sometimes a strong, inspiring personality helps to reduce stress and anxiety among followers and among people. Right? They can motivate people towards new possibilities and to put aside their own interests for the sake of the team, for the sake of the department and the organization. So, but unlike both transactional and transformational leadership that can be learned and adopted, charisma itself cannot be learned. I say that again, charisma itself cannot be learned. It's something internal. However, there are aspects of it that anyone can use. And we look at some of the characteristics of these charismatic leaders. So charismatic leaders can communicate complex ideas and goals in such a way that they compel everyone to understand it, and more importantly, to identify with the message and identify with the notion of whether it be change or towards an organizational goal. They can create an atmosphere of change by articulating the idea of a future that is better than what currently exists. They may act in unconventional ways and might operate, think and operate outside the box. And they can use unconventional means to go beyond the status quo towards promoting change. A classic example is Richard Branson. We may know Richard Branson, who's the founder and the CEO of the Virgin Group. Now, his management style is absolutely unconventional. And if we look at it on paper without knowing the individual and without knowing his massive success, I'm sure we already determined that it is a recipe for disaster. It is bound to fail. For example, I'll just give you a couple of them. He promotes a hands-off approach to management and encourages employees to make their own decisions. Failure is taken in stride as proof that his people are really stretching themselves. He emphasizes that brand awareness is a much higher priority than profits. Now, who does that? Brand awareness is more important than profit? Really? On paper, this sounds like a recipe for disaster, but yet he has been successful across a range of different industries, not one industry, a range of industries, spanning over 400 other companies. Another important trait is that charismatic leaders earn followers' trust by being willing to incur personal risk as well. Take, for example, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who received numerous death threats against himself and against his family almost daily during the civil rights movement. Right? So when leaders actually show that they're in this together, that instead of just saying it from a position of comfort and safety, they're showing that we're actually in this together. We're in the dirt, we're in the trenches, we're taking fire. And we can compare that to many world leaders today. We have a lot of them who making these decisions from a position of comfort and safety. And you have some that who are actually with their troops. I'm not saying troops not in a military aspect only, but you know we call troops with the persons on the ground within the organization. So there are so much leaders and they instill that level of trustworthiness amongst their followers. And if we look at a military perspective of it, we could use a common example as we see within the last couple of years with the Russia and Ukraine war. The Ukraine president, Volodymyr Zelensky, he was there on the ground with his troops. He's showing the troops that we are in this together. I'm not sending you all to fight for your country and sending you all to die. If we are dying together. If we are winning together. And that type of leader shows, and that type of leader shows that charisma and that charm that propels their troops and their followers to follow them regardless of where they go and what the end state is. So by taking risks, leaders enhance their emotional appeal to followers. Although some of them may be in a formal position of authority, their source of influence does not necessarily come from that position itself, but more so from their personal characteristics. Here we look at this other table here that shows some of the characteristics of non-charismatic leaders and charismatic leaders. So we have a lot of characteristics here: their likableness, their trustworthiness, their relation to the status quo, and we mentioned this a little while ago. Non-charismatic leaders try to maintain the status quo, whereas charismatic leaders try to go above that and beyond that. Right? Their articulation, non-charismatic leaders, they have a weak articulation of the goals and the motivation to lead. And that is quite comparable to a charismatic leader who shows strong and inspirational articulation of vision and the motivation to lead. If you look at their behavior, non-charismatic leaders are more conventional and they conform to norms. And as we see from the example before, charismatic leaders are more unconventional and more counter-normative. So we see the differences between what we refer as non-charismatic leaders and charismatic leaders. So now that we look at the positive characteristics of charismatic leaders, let's touch briefly on the dark side of the force, or as DAFT puts it, the black hat of charisma. It has been agreed by many researchers that charisma can be a curse as well as a blessing. Take, for example, we have leaders such as Winston Churchill, John F. Kennedy, Mahatma Gandhi, and more recently, Barack Obama, or even the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. All of them possess and display and show tremendous charisma. But think also, so did leaders such as Adolf Hitler. We have the cult leader Charles Manson, the butcher of Uganda Idi Amin, and of course the so-called Reverend Jim Jones, who was responsible for the Jonestown massacre, for the death of over 900 people, men, women, and children. Imagine what kind of charisma you must possess, not to kill her, but to influence all these people to kill themselves and their families. Imagine that. And in Hitler's case, you have the charisma to convince nations to side with him and to determine that mass genocide of millions of people was an excellent idea. What level of charisma that takes to convince all these people to go this direction. Well, I do apologize a little bit for getting a little bit macabre back there, but these are some of the more extreme examples of the dark side of charismatic leadership. So therefore, it is important to note that charisma may not always be used to benefit the group, the organization, or even society, but can actually be used for self-serving purposes, leading to deception, leading to manipulation, and of course to the exploitation of others. And one explanation for charisma to be able to possess the ability to result in positive outcomes as well as for negative is attributed to the difference between what we see here as being personalized and socialized leaders. Now, personalized leaders, charismatic leaders, are characterized as being self-aggrandizing. So they have a type of self-elevation and acclaim. They are non-egalitarian, so they're more like a dictator, and they're exploitative of their followers. And compare that now to our socialized charismatic leaders who are more empowering, more egalitarian or democratic, and more supportive. So in essence, personalized behavior is based on caring about self, and socialized behavior is based on valuing others. So we may now try to define what exactly is power and how does it differ from influence. Sometimes the terms power and influence are used synonymously, but there are distinctions between the two. Power is often defined as the potential ability of a person or group to persuade or compel other persons or groups to carry out a task or to do something they otherwise would not have done or to bring about desired outcomes. Whereas influence, however, is the effect a person's action have on the attitudes, values, beliefs, or actions of others. So we can say that power might be seen as an active persuasion originating in a person's ability, while influence might be deemed as a somewhat passive originating in a person's nature. So now I would hand you over to Mr. Joel Hansen, who would continue the discussion into the types of power, their sources, and their effects that they have on followers. Joel?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I think I've seen Rona's hand raised.
Yes, are you all taking questions or comments during the presentation?
Sure. If you have a question or a comment, Rona, you could go ahead. I do apologize. I from my screen I can't see your hands.
That's okay. So Ryan, in terms of charisma, do you, in your opinion, think for leaders, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it all depends on, as we see on the slide before, on the type of leader that they are. If they are a personalized leader or positional personalized or socialized leader. So it all depends on what they use charisma for. And I think society itself can make that determination, because they, in their mind, who knows, they could probably think that they are making it for they are making decisions and preaching outcomes that they think might be the best thing to do, but society might disagree. So yes, charisma, as we see from this slide, we see that positive and both negative effects of charisma, and it can be used on either side. So I don't think it's as black or white to say yes, charisma is good or charisma is bad. It all depends on how it's used, as we have seen, as history has taught us.
So in terms of leaders, I saw you more or less was on the negative side with charisma, because you sort of in fact, you highlighted most of the negative, the leaders and the negative things they did because they were charismatic. I can't remember. Did you have anything, any leader there that used charisma in a good way?
I apologize if it seemed like I highlighted the negative.
No, don't apologize. It's just not
No,
to me. I think charisma is such a good.
Yes, it is. I actually started with the positive effects of charisma and the type of change that these leaders can have. And I actually showed, if I go back to the slides, I actually I highlighted, I mentioned, I didn't show on this, but this slide dealt with the dark side of it. But I highlighted there were leaders such as Winston Churchill, JFK, Mahatma Gandhi, Barack Obama. I call these all these names prior to this, but this slide basically just dealt with the dark side of it, or as DAFT had put it, the black hat of charisma.
Okay, good job.
No problem. So we'll go back to Joel. So.
Hi, yeah. So positional power versus personal power. When we were doing our research to see how we could bring about this, we saw that most references class power in 5 main types, which were then separated into 2 categories: positional power and personal power. Notice that the 5 types of leader power, as you can see here, in the chart is legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, while personal power includes expert power and referent power. Both categories originate from exactly from what the name implies. Position power would essentially stem from an individual's position in the organization or in society, whilst personal power may be based on the individual's personal characteristics. We look at each of these types of power and see how they fit into the two categories. So we start with legitimate power, or legitimacy. This is the authority granted from a formal position in an organization. Subordinates tend to comply as they accept the power as valid. We have reward power. This kind of power stems from the authority to grant rewards to other people. Leaders with reward power tend to use rewards to influence their subordinates' behavior. This is especially seen when leaders control resources and how they are distributed. Come to coercive power. Now, this can be viewed as the opposite of reward power, because it refers to the power to punish or recommend punishment. And sometimes it is seen as the negative side of legitimate and reward power. Come to expert power. Now, this refers to the power resulting from a leader's special knowledge or skill regarding tasks that are performed by followers. But it's good to know that leaders at supervisory levels often have that experience in the production process that gains them their promotion. However, at top management levels, and we see this at big state companies where they move a manager from, let's say, from oil and gas and bring them across into, telecommunication. They may lack that expert power because they are managers or seen as fit for to be a CEO, they place them there, but more so the ground men, they are the one that have all the expertise of their organization because of the knowledge that they have, and they use that knowledge to influence decisions, sometimes made by their superiors in the organization. We then come to referent power. This kind of power stems from the leader's personality traits that command followers, identification, respect, and administration, and emulation. This is evident with charismatic leaders. The referent power is held based on the leader's personal characteristics rather than on a formal title or position. Now, we've seen these charts here. After researching, we saw that the topic, you might find different texts, and authors might suggest there's a sixth type of power, which is information power. And others might include even a seventh, connection power. These are the name, as the name implies, power gained respectfully from the information that a person may hold or connection they may possess, who they know. But we will just be focused on the 5 types of power as previously defined. Now that we have explored various types of power and their sources, let's take a look at some of the responses of the use of power. Leaders use the various types of power to influence others to do what is necessary to accomplish organizational goals. But must note, however, that there are 3 distinct outcomes. They may result from the use of power: compliance, resistance, and commitment. When you look at compliance, it means that people follow the directions of the person with power, whether or not they agree with it, with those directions. I guess you can see that in the military or police force or whatever, where you see a superior officer, they give instruction, and you might not like it, but I would say, hey, that's the job. You have to jump and follow suit. So this is prevalent with the use of position power, where followers may just do enough work as necessary to satisfy the leader that they may not contribute their full potential. We have resistance. Sometimes the use of position power, especially through coercion, employees may resist the attempt to influence, and they may even deliberately try to avoid carrying out instructions or even disobeying orders. Therefore, the effectiveness of the leaders who rely solely on position power may be limited. Commitment. This type of follow response often generated by personal power instead of position. Commitment means the followers adopt the leader's viewpoint and enthusiastically carry out instructions. Now, as you look at the diagram, it shows the expected response according to the type of power used. By the appropriate use of position power, we can expect compliance. However, from its misuse or excessive use, we can expect a level of resistance. And by the use of personal power, the employee or follower commitment can be widely expected. Now here we see in these two circles where they intersect each other. And to the center, we see effective leader. Most effective leader is one who is able and the personal power and marry those two. And that then becomes a most effective leader. I'm sure most would agree with that. It is important when the leaders are attempting to promote change or transformation. Successful leaders will need to be able to exercise both personal and position power to successfully influence others and to achieve the best output. Now this topic, the heading, I should say, the rule of dependency. When I started the rule of dependency, it brought me back to this radio program, the iron dependency. I just had to laugh about that one, the iron of dependency. But one of the key aspects of power is that the function of dependence. When a person has control over something that others want and need, he or she gains power. The more people that depend on it, the greater the person's power. So for example, in tight labor markets, where vacancies are numerous and labor is scarce, managers may be dependent on employees, and therefore leaders must exercise personal power to a great extent. Since people may have a higher tendency to stay in a job where they admire and respect the leader, even if other opportunities exist. But however, when jobs are scarce, it is easier for leaders to get by relying on position power, as employees are less likely to leave, but they may still not get the full benefit of employees' enthusiasm and commitment. Control over resources. Dependency within organizations is usually related to a person's control over the resources. As people become more dependent and leaders gain more control and power when resources are high on three specific characteristics. And these are importance, scarcity, and non-substitutability. The importance of a product or resource refers to the significance of it to possibly the production process or to meet organizational groups, goals, or etc. and etc. Scarcity then refers to how easily it is to obtain the resource and the potential supply of it. While non-substitutability means that leaders or employees with control over resources with no viable replacement or substitute would generally have more power. The characteristics that affect dependency and power in organizations. Here we see an illustration, the relationship between the resource characteristics and the level of power gained from its control. So if you look on the left-hand side, where the resources is unimportant, it is widely available with acceptable substitutes. The leader power will considerably be lower. Now compare the difference as you progress up the scale to the right-hand side. As the resource gets more important and scarcity increases with little or no substitutes, we can see that the leader's power increases. And this brings us to the end of my segment of the presentation. I will now hand you over to Mr. Samuj, who will take us through the sources of leader power within the organization.
Thank you, Mr. Joel. Moving on, we will be speaking about sources of leader power in organization. When we examine various forms of leader power in organization, it begins with a foundational understanding of resource dependency and control. As outlined previously, the 5 types of power are derived from the leader's formal position or their personal attributes. They form the foundation for most of the leader's influence. However, additionally, forms of power and influence have been recognized in organization. According to the strategic contingencies theory, power comes from the leader's contribution to the organization overall performance and not necessarily from any one person, individual, or position. According to the DAFT textbook, sources of power can be categorized as interdepartmental dependency, control over information, organizational centrality, and coping with uncertainty, as shown in the diagram. And we will discuss each. Interdepartmental dependency is a major source of leader power in many organizations. This basically means that departments within organization rely on and coexist with one another. Materials, resources, and information may flow between departments in one direction, from one department to another in the process of the end product or what have you. But leaders in the department that is receiving the resources may have less power than those in the department that provides them. Despite the trend towards empowering and educating employees with greater information sharing, there will always be certain people who holds more information. Control over information is an essential source for leaders because it entails both access to knowledge and control over how and to whom it is given. Most leaders recognize that information is a critical business resource and that they can influence how choices are made by controlling what information is collected, how it is evaluated, and how it is disseminated. Organizational centrality reflects a leader or a department's role in the primary activity of an organization. One measure of centrality is the extent to which the work of a leader's department affects the final output of the organization. And a very good example of this is a company such as Intel, which is heavily technology oriented. The engineers have a high degree of power because the organization depends on them to maintain that technical superiority of its product. And then we have coping with uncertainties. Leaders face ambiguity and complexity when the environment changes quickly. Leaders have little information about effective courses of action in the face of uncertainty. Leaders in departments that deal effectively with uncertainty will gain much more power. It is said that market research specialists acquire influence and reputation when they successfully see these changes. The ability to decrease a significant level of uncertainty causes leaders in industrial relations department to gain authority by assisting the organization in dealing with labor union uncertainty. Let us now take a look at a short video on formal and informal power and how it affects leadership.
I'm Dr. Bob Milligan. Today, we're going to talk about this question. How do leaders engage their followers to produce great results? We see some great leaders there: Abe Lincoln, George Washington, Winston Churchill. Obviously, they used a number of measures, a number of ways to become great leaders. But what we want to visit today is how do you interact with your employees? Because you are in a position of leadership, you're the owner, you're the supervisor, you're the manager, whatever your title is, you have some power because you're in that position. It's called position power, or we can think of it as formal power. The formal power is based on the position held by the leader, the manager, or the supervisor. That's the form of power that leaders tend to use, or supervisors, when they begin.
So now that we see formal power is related to position power, which Ryan spoke about earlier, can anyone tell me what is informal power and what it is related to?
Personal
Anybody?
power. Personal
Yes.
power.
Yes, that is correct. And we will continue with the video.
But one of the things that they learn over time is that there's another very important way to engage your employees, and that is informal power or influence. When we use formal power, our employees will tend to follow because they have to. We've told them what to do and they do it. And that worked okay historically when most tasks were pretty routine. Today in our complex world, it doesn't work so well. In addition, as the generations have passed, employees have had to become more and more in tune to higher expectations. They want to be engaged. They want to have a reason for their work. And those things require the use of informal power. Connection. We've talked in other videos about connection, building a relationship, reward, personal powers, charisma, and so forth. Information and expertise power. One of the reasons people want to follow leaders is because they're successful. And so there's success included in this. They want to be a part of a winning team. And so as we think about what's going on today, and as you think about your role as a leader, you want to minimize or reduce at least the amount of reliance you have on formal power and use connection and leadership examples, walk the talk and so forth, the informal power, the influence to engage your employees. One way to think of it is, with formal power, employees do work because they have to. With informal power, employees work because they want to.
Okay, moving on. As we discussed previously, formal and informal power speaks to the leader's ability to use either positional power or personal power. And of course, the types of responses we get and expect from each. Moving on, we will speak on the increase in power through political activities. People who want to increase their power make their activities visible and appreciated by others, acquiring and using power in a largely a political process. Leaders at most organizations engage in some degree of political activity aimed at influencing government policies. They do that because government choices represent a critical source of uncertainty for businesses as well as non-profit organizations. Organizations use political activity to try and influence decisions that will be to their benefit. And individuals and departments within organizations also engage in political activity. The appropriate use of power and politics to get things done is an important aspect of leadership. Leaders also use politics to increase their personal power. One way leaders increase their power is by seeking greater responsibility, such as serving on committees or volunteering for a difficult project. And in the Defense Force, we have a special name for them. I'm sure many of us could relate to that. This often enables them to make connection with powerful people in the organization and build their reputation among those people. When lower levels leaders are perceived as having friends in higher places, their own power is increased. And I'm very sure that we can relate to that. Politics involves activities to acquire, develop, and use power and other resources to obtain desired future outcomes in an organization. When there is a level of uncertainty or disagreement about choices, politically skillful leaders strive to understand others' viewpoints, needs and desires, and goals to engage individuals and divisions within the organization. Political behavior can be either positive or a negative force. Uncertainty and conflict are natural in organization, and politics is a mechanism for accomplishing things that cannot be handled purely through formal policies or position power. To maintain that power of leadership and thrive in an ever-changing environment, some key strategies can be implemented. By thinking politically, a key step is acknowledging the political nature of leadership. And by creating nurturing networks of people leaders can call on and work with to accomplish goals. Leaders often seek to control how others perceive them, often creating an impression of greater power as well as helping them gain more power. A whole new industry or organization has politics activities to acquire, develop, and use power in order to obtain desired future outcomes when there's a level of uncertainty or disagreement about choices. This brings me to the end of this portion of the presentation. Are there any questions?
Yeah, what's the name you all call the people in the military who operate in that manner?
We call them who's this? We call them stool birds.
Stool birds.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's a new definition I didn't know about. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if none, I will now hand you over to Mr. Dwayne Warner, who will introduce some tactics for asserting leader influence.
Thanks, Dave. As we continue, I'd like to discuss some tactics for asserting leader influence. Have you ever wondered how leaders use their power to implement decisions, facilitate change, or pursue organizational goals? They usually use their power to influence the people around them, and this requires skill as well as willingness. Now, some influence can be interpersonal and one-on-one. Such an influence is seen as social influence, and this involves coalitions, rewards, and inspiration. And then other influences tend to have a broader appeal. For instance, influencing an entire organization, or even influencing those outside of the organization. However, not all attempts to use power results in influence. And we've all seen instances when a leader failed to sway or influence the people around their charge, or under their charge, sorry. Some power moves that leaders make are rejected by the followers, especially if their motives seem to be self-serving or not in the interest of the followers in question. Leaders must determine the best approaches for using their power. In other words, they need to figure out a method that would best influence others. This should be done by considering the people, as well as the groups and situations involved. Additionally, leaders must also understand the basic principles that cause people to change their attitudes or behavior. Leaders often use a combination of different influence strategies. In fact, individuals who use a wider range of tactics tend to be perceived as having a greater amount of power and influence. Once upon a time, there was a survey done where hundreds of leaders participated. From this survey, they were able to identify more than 4,000 different techniques that were used to influence the followers. The techniques or tactics identified were broken down and categorized into basic influence actions. I'd like to bring to your attention this slide, which illustrates 7 principles that can be used to assert leader influence. We have use rational persuasion, make people like you, rely on the rule of reciprocity, develop allies, ask for what you want, remember the principle of scarcity, and extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. As I take you through these principles one by one, you may realize that the majority of them involve the use of personal power, as opposed to having to rely on positional power, or having to use rewards or punishments. Let's look at the first principle. This may very well be one of the most frequently used influence tactics. Rational persuasion involves the use of facts, data, and logical arguments in order to persuade others that the proposed idea is the best method to accomplish a goal or complete a task. This particular influence tactic has been proven effective across the board due to the use of facts and proper analysis. So it can be an effective method regardless of whether the influential attempt has been directed upwards at superiors, downward at subordinates, or even horizontally across peers and colleagues. According to DAFT, rational persuasion is most effective when a leader has technical knowledge and and expertise related to the issue. I repeat, rational persuasion is most effective when a leader has technical knowledge and expertise related to the issue. This is referred to as expert power. It should also be noted that apart from expert power, this tactic also utilizes referent power in creating influence. And referent power can be defined as a type of power that stems from a leader's ability to inspire and influence others. Often, you will observe or hear about a subject matter expert being called upon, either to justify certain claims or validate their recommendations. You may have even been in a situation where you had to rely on facts and data to influence others towards a goal or decision. You should note that there are many times where some parts of a rational argument just cannot be backed up by facts and figures, and the leader would have to rely on his or her credibility in order for people to accept the argument. Let's move on to the second principle. Making people like you. Now, we know that it's easier to say yes to someone that we like as opposed to someone that we don't like. And tensions are less when we deal with someone that we're comfortable around. When a leader shows concern for others, builds trust, shows respect, and practices fairness, people are more likely to support that leader and help when necessary. Additionally, most people will appreciate a leader who makes them feel good about themselves. It's good to remember that a leader must never underestimate the importance of praise. Moving on to the third principle, where we rely on the rule of reciprocity. Joel would have touched on the topic of dependency earlier, and we would have seen how leaders can gain power by having something that other people value. One primary way of turning power into influence is actually sharing what you have. Now, this could be time, resources, services, or even emotional support. You know how there's this feeling that people should be paid back in return for what they do in some form or fashion? Kind of like saying one good deed deserves another. Call it an unwritten law of reciprocity, if you will. But this unwritten law means that leaders who do favors for others can expect favors to be done for them in return. Leaders also elicit or express the kind of sharing and cooperative behavior that they desire from others by demonstrating it with their own actions. Some researchers have argued that this concept of exchange, which is basically trading something of value for what you want, is the basis or foundation of all other influence tactics. Let's use the first two principles as examples. Rational persuasion works because the other person sees some kind of benefit from going along with the leader's plan. And making people like you is also successful because the other person receives liking and attention in return. The fourth principle that can be used to assert leader influence is developing allies. Since we just covered the role of reciprocity, you should also note that reciprocity plays an important role in developing networks of allies and the people who can help the leader accomplish his or her goals. Leaders can influence others by taking time to talk to followers or other leaders outside of formal settings in order to better understand their concerns and needs, and even explain problems or describe the leader's point of view. It's not unusual for leaders to consult with each other, put their heads together, and reach a meeting of minds about a proposed decision or strategy. A recent study revealed that political skill, especially network building, has a positive impact on followers' perceptions of the leader's abilities and performance, as well as positively impacting the actual objective performance of the work unit. A leader can expand his or her network of allies by reaching out to additional people to establish some kind of connection. Some leaders expand their networks through the hiring, transfer, and promotion process. Because identifying individuals who are understanding and in favor of the leader's desired outcomes and placing them in strategic positions can be beneficial in achieving the leader's goals. However, if a leader's allies perceive power building as being self-serving, then those key people may become alienated. So keep that in mind. Asking for what you want is the fifth principle that can be used to assert leader influence. Sounds easy enough, right? Another method of having influence is making a direct appeal by being explicit about what you want and asking for it. Ask and you shall receive. If leaders don't ask, they'll hardly ever receive. Political activity is only effective when the leader's vision, goals, desired changes are made so that the organization can understand and respond accordingly. Leaders can be assertive by using the courage to persuade others by saying what they believe. People may accept an explicit proposal because they have no better alternatives. Also, an explicit proposal for change or for a specific decision alternative will often receive favorable treatment when other options are less defined or aren't as clear. Keep in mind that effective political behavior requires sufficient forcefulness and risk-taking when trying to achieve desired outcomes. Moving on to principle number 6. Remember the principle of scarcity. Let's face it, people want what they can't have. And when things are less available, they become more desirable. Whether it's highlighting limited resources, offering exclusive opportunities, skills, and offers, setting deadlines for projects or initiatives, or even placing emphasis on a competitive environment. Leaders can use the principle of scarcity and highlight unique benefits and exclusive information to capture people's interest and increase their likelihood to support position. And here we are at the last principle. Extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. This deals with the leader's legitimate authority within the organization. Legitimate authorities are in a position to be particularly influential. However, according to researchers, the key to the successful use of formal authority is to be knowledgeable, credible, and trustworthy. Usually, managers who become known for their expertise, who are honest and straightforward with others, who inspire trust, can exert greater influence than those who simply try to issue orders. Additionally, effective leaders keep the other 6 influence principles in mind, realizing that influence primarily depends on personal power as opposed to position power. So by understanding the importance of these principles, rational persuasion, liking and friendship, reciprocity, networks of alliances, direct appeal, and scarcity, leaders can extend the power of their former position and strengthen their influence over others. This takes us to our final section, ethical considerations in using power and politics. Harry Truman, the 33rd President of the United States of America, once said, "Leadership is the ability to get people to do what they don't want to do and like it." His statement raises an important issue, though. Leadership is an opportunity to use power and influence to accomplish important operational goals. Important organizational goals. But power can also be abused. Unfortunately, in many organizations, there are a lot of people who use power and influence to cater to their own interests at the expense of others and the organization. Remember when personalized leaders versus socialized leaders was discussed earlier? The distinction between the two leaders refers primarily to their approach to the use of power. Personalized leaders are usually selfish, impulsive, and exercise power for their own needs and interests rather than for the good of the organization. While socialized leaders, however, exercise power in the service of higher goals that will benefit others and the organization as a whole. There is one particular area in organizations where there is a growing concern for the unethical use of power, and that's sexual harassment. People and organizations depend on one another, especially leaders, for many resources, including information, cooperation, and even matters pertaining to their jobs. When access to resources seems to depend on granting sexual favors or putting up with sexually intimidating or threatening comments, the person in a dependent position is being personally violated, regardless of whether or not the leader actually withholds his resources. Luckily, many organizations are developing policies and procedures that are tailored around protecting individuals from sexual harassment on the job, and they offer avenues and procedures for reporting complaints. This move was partially due to organizations being pressured by the courts. We need to remember that sexual harassment isn't just unethical, it's illegal, and it is a clear abuse of power. However, there are many other situations in organizations that are not so obvious and clear-cut, and leaders may sometimes have difficulty differentiating ethical from unethical uses of power and politics. The slide you see highlights and summarizes some criteria that can guide ethical actions. Firstly, there's the question of whether the action is motivated by self-interest or whether the action is consistent with the organization's goals. Once a leader is able to answer that primary question, there are other questions that can help him or her determine whether a potential influence action is ethical, including whether it respects the rights of individuals and groups affected by it, whether it meets the standards of fairness, and whether the leader would want others to behave in the same way. If a leader answers these questions honestly, then the questions can serve as a guide to whether an intended act is ethical or not. In the complex world of organizations, there will always be situations that are difficult to interpret. The most important thing is for leaders to be aware of the ethical responsibilities of having power and be mindful to use their power to help rather than to harm others. Instead of thinking about getting their own way, leaders should more think in terms of building long-term productive relationships that can achieve goals and benefit the entire organization. As we come to the end of our presentation, I'd like to recap on a few things. Today, we discussed the various types of power and various forms of influences. We highlighted their sources, their characteristics, and their effectiveness. So, can we now identify who might be considered an individual with power or a leader with influence? We emphasized on the power and politics by leaders to achieve their goals. We know that leaders use a variety of influence tactics, including rational persuasion, like in friendliness, reciprocity, developing allies, direct appeal, scarcity, and formal authority. It was also highlighted how important it is for leaders to use power and politics ethically and responsibly, serving the organization's goals, respecting the rights of individuals and groups, and striving to be fair. Now, we know that power and politics are an essential part of leadership, but they must be used carefully. I encourage you to use the principles of ethical leadership to guide your use of power and politics. When you use your power wisely, you can make a positive difference, both internally and outside of your organization. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions at this point?
Yes, Mr. Warner, I have a question. Rather a view, having listened to the presentation, and now I am enlightened about, all the characteristics of power and how it should be used. I'm trying to wrap my mind around our experience with the politicians of today generally, and how we are not, or how it's not evident that they actually, we are seeing ethics involved in some of the way they carry out their power, or they use their power. That's just my thought about it.
Well, remember, apart from it being subjective, not everyone would have the people, or I guess in our case, the organization, or themselves, the country. They mightn't have it in their best interest. Their goals may initially be perceived as being in favor of the people, but sometimes it might just be for self-serving purposes. So I would advise you to take things with a pinch of salt when listening to our politicians, because sometimes they may have good intentions, but it wouldn't hurt to think a little deeper and just wonder what really is their end goal.
If I may as well, on that same point that Taran brought up, not only politicians and organizations and leaders in general, I think now that we understand the various aspects of it and the where the sources are and what the relative responses are, it allows us now to assess certain leaders within our own life, basically, if it means being within our levels of employment, be it within our religious institutions, be it within our political activities on a daily basis, or even from ourselves, from the position that we stand as leaders, know that we can actually assess what exactly is being portrayed, and if it is that we are looking at a level of introspection, now look to make the necessary corrections towards the I wouldn't say correct path, because correct path can be a subjective entity, but towards the path of achieving the change or the goal that we are actually looking for. If there are no further questions, I think that brings us to the end of our presentation for today. Thank you all very much for your time today.